Happy New Year, friends, and welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. Albeit in the case of these clips you're watching now, this will be Happy New Year's of 2023. We're going to take a look at some older clips this time around. There's a train in this video that may not be running anymore, and it's kind of a continuation of a series that kind of went cold in 2021. So I'm finally going to get all these clips together and get them online for you to see, because you may not be able to see this train anymore. It's January 28th of 2023, and we're set up at the throat of Yman Yard under the Orient Road overpass. In the foreground is an empty ethanol unit train that has just returned from the Port of Tampa's gasoline terminals with some run-through Union Pacific foreign power on the head end. Now, this train wouldn't be going anywhere today while we were around, but it was a neat sight to see in the foreground of what is the usual mundane terrain of Tampa. Though arguably, even at this time, and especially 2 years later now, a much more interesting train was about to grace the scene. Splitting the signals at YN coming south is train CO10, a southbound unit train of coal loads bound for Tampa Electric's Big Bend power station in Tampa Bay. After roughly 3 days of traverse over the open rails, these 108 loads are finally arriving into Hillsborough County, Florida. A trio of GE ES44 AH locomotives would be hauling these loads south, with two up front and the third in the middle of the train as distributed power. These trains have been a point of interest of mine to see for quite some time, even back at this point.
24 engine CSXT 3901 approach YN southbound 3901.
The Big Bend power station, run by Tampa Electric Company, or Teco for short, have, like many other Floridian power plants, been gradually transitioning to other forms of energy production, in Teco's case, mostly natural gas, with plans to eventually reduce Big Bend's infrastructure from 4 coal-fired furnaces down to only 1, with the new natural gas lines that have been under construction for years now to pick up the slack of the 3 that will soon be gone, the last coal-fired furnace only remaining there as a backup asset. As you may be able to denote from both the speed of travel and the curved routing, this train is not heading into Yman Yard, but is rather bypassing it on what is simply known as the Yman Bypass Track. This is exactly what I was hoping for to happen.
Coming, cool train, keep on coming. You can swap out right after crossing.
Alright, here we come.
The bypass track does just what it says, bypasses Yman Yard, leading as a direct route to the beginning of the Tampa Terminal subdivision that is the first quadrant of what eventually becomes the Palmetto subdivision all the way to Bradenton. In the summer of 2021, I caught another one of these Tampa coal trains headed south and chased it down the majority of CSX's Southern S line through Bushnell and Plant City. That chase would end up terminating here at Yman Yard. If you're interested in watching that video, I'll leave a link to it down in the description below, but today was different. Today I wanted to actually see a shipment get delivered to the Big Bend power station. As once these coal trains reach Yman Yard, it can go one of two ways, simply into the yard tracks or down the Yman bypass. If the train goes into the yard, which happened after my chase in 2021, that means there is no next crew available and the train is going to sit in the yard until another crew is available, whether that's in a couple of hours or a couple of days. Train crews need special certifications for any routes that they run trains over, and the crew bringing this train to a stop now have been on it since Waycross, Georgia, and very few crews that are certified from Waycross to Tampa are also certified on the Tampa Terminal and or Palmetto subdivisions, so a crew change is almost always required here before they can go further. However, the train headed down the Yman bypass means that there is a crew on call and will be at the train very soon if they're not already waiting for them at the yard office. Because the Yman bypass track is not just a secondary main, it's a single main bypassing the entire yard, and it also serves as the route for all of the Bone Valley phosphate trains coming to and from Tampa Bay, and also for various locals, so they can't leave this track blocked for very long. So if something is going down this track and stopping on it, it's going to be moving again pretty soon. As they'd stopped the head end of the consist right at the yard office, the 108-car unit train that is right around 5,200 feet long just barely made it past my footed position under Orient Road, and was still sticking out just a bit beyond the overpass. So at that point, I packed everything up and moved right around the corner to the yard office to get a look at the locomotives and potentially the crew swap. But it appeared that by the time I had arrived, that was already done, as there was already a crew sitting in there and no crew van in sight. I imagined at this point they were getting all of their train orders together and permissions to head down to the power plant, as they called the dispatcher very shortly, confirming my suspicions, asking for their EC1 authority to use the tracks down to Big Bend.
Over this engine on this train on the bypass, 3 engines, 108 cars, checking at the Big Bend. Over.
P1 number of 70829, that's 70829. Today's date 012823, location SA41.0. L77828, engine 3091 on Harris, Circle Line 1A. Hopping on main and siding track, south direction. From NAS East Tampa, Maine to the switch south end Big Bend siding track. Circle Line 11, take siding at north end Big Bend, over. Track will show locate effective at time 1548 JFC, over.
Alright, okay, effective 1548 JFC RLH. Thanks, sir.
Okay, stay on location there. Okay to pull from race stand.
Okay to pull from where we stand, stay on location.
So with their permissions to use their requirements of track beyond the limits of dark territory, CO10, or now L778, was ready to head down to Big Bend with their 108 loads of coal. To make for a classic, albeit incredibly modernized now, we'd set up just beyond the Yman Yard lead at the control point of the former TS crossing at the Adamo Drive road crossing. Now, over my years of watching trains in this area, I have seen many a things past this location that I never thought I would, but this would end up being the first and last time that I would ever see a coal train cross this road. As our bathtubs of carbon pass beneath the Solomon Expressway, let's talk train symbols. You may have noticed that he's running now with the symbol L778. Why is a unit train now running with a local symbol? L778 in question is usually a local job originating in Yman Yard, but it typically runs to Conrad Yelvington in Ybor City before running out to Winston Yard and possibly returning that same night. Regardless of what the typical symbol's duties are, it's never to bring a coal train down to Tampa's Big Bend station. So why are they doing that today? And that's for when I'll make the point that train symbols are actually more denoted to crews rather than they are a specific train. While they're operating the remains of train CO10, L778's crew has gotten on this train to take it down to Big Bend, as they were on duty right around the same time the train got here, and they are certified on the Tampa Terminal and Palmetto subdivisions. Now, I'm sure the logistics of this decision-making go a lot deeper than the vague description I've just given, but without working for this Fortune 500 company to any degree, it's impossible for me to know exactly why these things were done. All I knew is that I wanted to see this train get to the plant in one piece, which will have actually become an ironically unorthodox thought by the end of this. But at that point, I would simply begin my long-awaited pursuit of now L778, headed for Big Bend and the dark territory side of the southern end of CSX's system. Setting up next across the Alafaya River in Gibsonton, another one of my notoriously noted favorite spots. I still to this day, like many other things, can't tell you why I like this spot. I think it almost reminds me of a sort of model railroading kind of scene, where everything is kind of blocky, neat, and all just kind of lines up, with buildings on one side, parking lots next to them, and a 2-lane or 4-lane highway on the other side, freshly manicured grass, and fairly nice scenery surrounding. I guess the other matter of that is that finding maintained vegetation surrounding railroad property is not a common sight. But either way, it'd be yet another welcome visit to the crossing at Estelle Avenue.
Alpha 78. 778 over.
Yes, sir, the Alpha is line of lock for your forward movement, and you may proceed upon signal indication.
Alright, line of lock, that's southbound, proceed, signal indication. Okay, thank you.
That's all right. Help out.
Very shortly now on my heels, the call train calls the Alafaya River Bridge tender for permission to cross the river, as they'd have to line the swing span into position for them to cross. With precisely no other trains running on this line at this point in the day, they would be top priority, so the bridge was lined and locked in about 3 minutes, and they'd be across it in no less. Now that the train is passing through Gibsonton, we are officially in the dark territory section of this southern subdivision. And despite this only being the second location we've set up for the train since Yman, we've already traversed a good 7/8 of the route to Big Bend. It's only about 7 track miles from Yman Yard to the Big Bend station, and only about 5 track miles from Yman to the start of dark territory. The Tampa Terminal subdivision begins north of Yman Yard at Yman, running around the yard as the Yman bypass track, and terminating at the signal control point of East Tampa, located at mile AZA 885, about a mile to our north. Upon the termination of the Tampa Terminal subdivision, ergo everything south of that East Tampa signal, is now the Palmetto subdivision running all the way to Bradenton. So we are now on the Palmetto subdivision for the rest of the trip to Big Bend, which is only about another mile. Us now being in dark territory is the reasoning behind why the dispatcher gave this train permission to use the respective switches at Big Bend siding in their EC1. Though because permission is required since they are switches off the main line, this train won't have to stop to throw these switches. The switches at both the south and north end of Big Bend siding are radio remote switches, meaning that the engineer of this train can change the switches' positions by simply typing in a code in the keypad of their locomotive. Here is the sequence of this train reversing the switch at mile AZA 888.8, the north end of Big Bend, so that they can head into the facility.
Control switch at milepost AZ888.8 in reverse position and lock.
If you roll by there, 778.
Thanks for that inspection. That's that out.
The parallel US 41 to the tracks in Gibsonton would ironically be the next setup location, as it was the crossing of the Big Bend spur branching off the Palmetto subdivision at the Big Bend siding track. In this mild telephoto shot, the train is visible crossing the open field of the property that has been cleared for the giant power lines ascending from the Big Bend station. The Big Bend station in question is just one of a few customers that reside off of this Big Bend spur, others that include National Gypsum, Mosaic Big Bend, and the Ardent Mills grain elevator that has been put into service just a few years prior. The rail portion of Teco's customer service actually doesn't take up that much real estate. The Teco portion of the Big Bend spur is only this loop track that branches off to the south. We'll talk a bit more about this loop track once we get there. The train now entering the Big Bend spur from the left-hand Big Bend siding track is down to 10 miles an hour all the way into the power plant loop track, as they cross US 41 practically at a snail's pace. Our loads are now crossing US 41 and are about a quarter mile from the loop track that the train will be left in before another crew will eventually come out at some point to bring the train through the unloader to unload the shipment. And things were all rolling across, albeit kinda slowly, although things were about to get slower. A lot slower. And just like that, everything grinded to a very sudden halt. That small puff of air that you heard over that last clip was the train line air pressure dumping. Every car on the train, interconnected by air hoses, is charged with compressed air from the locomotive to 90 psi that allows the brakes to release and thereby the train to move. Reduction of air pressure causes brakes to apply. Though if there is ever a break or loss of pressure to a great enough extent, all of the air will dump from the line, causing an effective emergency brake application. And that's just what happened here, but we weren't exactly sure why that happened. And for a little while, the crew wasn't either. I'd hear over the radio for about the next 10 minutes them trying to regain their air pressure, but it would always bottom out around a low PSI and would never charge to full capacity. Though the problem, while rather simple, would actually go a bit deeper than either of us at that point had realized. As I drove up the parallel Pembroke Road to kind of do a little light investigating myself, I found the problem was that about 20 cars deep, the train had actually separated and was now in two pieces. Likely the knuckle had broken or some defect within the couplings had caused the train to separate at this point, and when the air hoses disconnected, all of the air pressure dumped, and they were unable to regain air pressure because that end of the train that had separated was open, not allowing even the section that they still had connected to their engines to build air pressure. So I would actually end up driving to the head end of the train and letting the conductor know what the actual issue was, as they weren't aware of what was going on because they were simply unable to build air.
Up here said 20 cars deep, we're apart down there. 20 cars deep? Yeah, 20 cars.
I actually unknowingly caught the separation on my drone footage. If you look at the very bottom of the screen, you can see the very moment when the two cars come apart. Now, it was never fully understood by me whether one of the coupler knuckles broke or if it was another type of defect within the couplings that caused the separation, but either way, this is what caused the emergency brake application, as once the cars came apart, the air hoses would have as well. Now, nearly all of CSX's locomotives carry spare car knuckles on their rear ends for situations like this, so the simple solution here would theoretically be to replace the defective knuckle, reconnect the two sections, rebuild the air, and keep moving. But as the conductor went back to look at the issue, for some reason it was unable to be repaired that way, and they would have to call a car inspector and road foreman from Yman to come down and look at the problem, which was great and all until it was determined that those personnel could not arrive here for another 2 hours. And even then, sure, a couple hours wait, not so bad. If you're in the railroad industry, part of your training is to be able to hurry up and wait. But have you yet considered that your 2-hour wait is going to be spent fouling US 41, a 4-lane dual-direction highway less than 10 miles south of Tampa? Even on a late Saturday afternoon, this is a road that is still jam-packed with vehicle traffic, even without a train blocking the road for almost 2 hours. So this situation very quickly became a major headache for everyone involved.
We are actually up in here over 41 by about 20 cars, or about 40 cars.
Okay, we're going to have to find a way to head up there because there's a lot of traffic, so we'll be there in a little bit.
So all we could do at this point was hunker down and wait, and as the sun went down, vehicle traffic started passing me on the side of Pembroke Road, and I came to realize at that point after putting the drone in the air that people were starting to figure out a solution to this very unorthodox problem. Pembroke Road on the south side of the US 41 crossing and Diana-Toledo Road on the north side of the crossing both connect inside of the Big Bend Spur properties to connect access points to various industries, and people came to find that this provided a route that just barely was able to get around the stop coal train. Since the head end of the coal train had managed to come to a stop just before the crossing of Pembroke Road, people were able to come down said road and cross in front of the train, connecting back to US 41 at Diana-Toledo, or vice versa. And this is the way the traffic flow would be until this train would eventually cover both crossings and finally get out of the way of both crossings. Vehicles of all shapes and sizes were somehow able to circumvent this route for the entire 2 hours this train sat stationary. I drove around the various roads surrounding the Big Bend terminals, and I found that some of the car inspectors were taking a look at some spare Teco hoppers that were sitting on the spur tracks inside the facility. Now, I'm not entirely positive on this, but I do believe the RDL coal hoppers that these trains use are fitted with rotary couplers that allow them to be used inside rotary dumpers that will flip the cars upside down while still on the train. And if I'm not mistaken, those rotary couplers use some sort of specialized knuckle and pin setup that allow the drawbar to rotate inside the draft gear box. So it's likely that whatever knuckle that needed to be replaced on this coal hopper would not be the standard kind found on the ends of locomotives that they keep spare for situations like this. But it appeared to me that the car inspectors would end up taking a spare knuckle from one of the sidelined coal hoppers in the plant and replacing the malfunctioning or damaged knuckle on our coal train with one of those. So after nearly 2.5 hours of sitting stationary, they could finally put the coal train back together. Traffic is pouring around from 41, and it is just getting heavier and heavier. Wow.
Alright, least 37, ground point, car and half couple. Car 91.
With the whole consist finally back in one piece and everything laced back together, the crew can finally get this 5,200 foot train moving the last quarter mile of their trip into the power plant loop. Now fully covering Pembroke Road that was the only passage for the last couple hours around the stopped train, now blocking both crossings, but they would finally keep their move on and eventually clear them both up. The tracks take one more divergence crossing Pembroke Road one more time off into the power plant loop track, which is where the train will be left and staged for the next crew to come in and actually unload the train. It's almost hard to believe that the train, having left Yman Yard bound for the plant just before 4 o'clock this afternoon, is finally entering the facility just after 7. But as some of my museum videos have shown you, and similar to this instance, railroading is not a state-of-the-art practice. Things go wrong all the time, and the best part about it is you learn a lot on how to fix these things as you go. Now that the train is entering the power plant loop track, we'll talk a little bit more about it as we brought it up a few minutes prior. The power plant loop track basically serves as the turnaround point for the coal trains. It's double tracked with the unloader on the inside track and the other being spare. The train is able to fit over both tracks, and the train is effectively turned around naturally so that it can leave in the same orientation it came in. But I'd shortly find that that track setup would cause yet another headache for tonight's crew that just can't seem to catch a break. So some genius that was in charge of moving the last set of cars around this loop track left 2 empty cars on the outside track of the double track loop, causing the train to have to cross tracks over to the center track, which goes through the unloader building. However, the unloader building in question has 2 overhead doors on it that will stay closed when no train is inside to prevent tampering, though the train had to go through the unloader building since they couldn't spin the outside loop track first. And because the building was shut, they were stuck again, with the train still not having fully made it into the loop track.
Nobody's answering.
Alright, well here's the deal. There were 2 cars on the outside loop, so we had to take the inside loop. Came around, the door is closed on the dumper.
Clear with your train, or is it still strung out?
I'd have to go down there and look, but with 108 cars, I doubt if we're clear.
So our crew once again was able to kick their feet up as the Yman Yardmaster had to reach out to Tampa Electric to try to get a hold of somebody who could actually come out and open the doors on the unloader building.
Yeah, well, I've never seen them just leave cars out on that outside loop. They usually just come around the outside loop and you're done, but you couldn't tonight.
You guys hear that? We got a hold of somebody. They're trying to get a hold of Teco to come open the door.
So then, and only then, the remainder of our 5,200 foot long train could enter the loop track and simply be left for the next crew at some point. I stuck around to try to get that process on film, but after sitting for almost another hour with no sign of anybody to show up, I called it a day. I can't remember what exactly I had on the schedule at this point 2 years ago, but I didn't feel like waiting any longer. My patience had just about run dry, and I figured with the amount I had gotten on film by this point, leaving it here y'all would still just about get the idea. So, just shy of 9 o'clock, with our Teco train in the foreground, we have our Teco plant further off in the distance. The power station visible in the background here still had 3 of its original 4 chimneys standing at this point in time. While the 4th one was removed in 2016, the last 2 would finally meet their end in May of 2024. So barely over a year after I shot this, they would be down to 1 chimney left in the sky. Though some of y'all may not have heard about this because Big Ben never had a magnificently explosive demolition like many tall structures out there, the 4 chimneys installed in the 1970s were 500 feet high and made of an inner layer of bricks and an outer shell of reinforced concrete. Due to that type of construction and spatial restraints, they couldn't just be blown up or torn down. They had to be taken apart in very small sections and lowered to the ground one by one. So the demolition was very gradual and did not make a lot of noise, neither figuratively nor literally. So it was only one faithful day last year in 2024 that I drove by Apollo Beach on Interstate 75 and saw only 1 stack in the Tampa Bay skyline. And that hit hard, because even though in relation to the power plant's age I am very young, I have always been used to seeing 2 or 3 stacks in the sky when passing Tampa Bay on the interstate. It really is, then, the end of an era to see these stacks gone. So to properly commemorate that and to properly finish this video, I'd make a revisit to the same location now in January of 2025. And up close from the air, it looks even more eerie. The chimney for Unit 1, I believe, was removed in 2016, with Units 2 and 3 having been demolished in this last year. Unit 4 is the only stack that is still visible today, and while I mentioned that Big Bend is transitioning mostly to natural gas as their fuel source, that is true, but more specifically, the practice they've undertaken is a sort of combined cycle technology. So, in essence, they use a natural gas turbine to generate electricity, but they're able to harness the heat of the exhaust gases from the turbine to effectively get double the energy output. So, if I'm not mistaken, all 4 units are still active at Big Bend, though Units 1 through 3 are now strictly the natural gas turbines, while Unit 4 is a standard furnace that mostly burns natural gas, but is also capable of still burning coal should they ever need to. But it really doesn't look like they need to. And the other reason I say that is that it's been well over a year now since I've heard of any loaded trains arriving at this facility, and the original line of RDL hoppers that ran back and forth to the mine and back are still sitting here on the power plant loop track. And a simple observation of the rust buildup on both the wheel tread and the rail heads are evidence of how long it's been since anything has rolled on this loop track. In fact, the lead track to this loop track off the Big Bend spur has been blue flagged just past the switch, meaning that no train can enter this facility without proper instructions and removal of this sign. And that's not to say that the need to get in here couldn't arise at some point in the future for some reason, but it's safe to say at this point that nothing has moved in or out of here in quite some time. Though I personally can't see these rails getting torn up at any point soon, because there's always the potential that the need for coal could arise again should other systems fail. Though the future of this Big Bend loop track, if any, is uncertain, and the tracks as of now are still not in the greatest condition. So I don't like to sit here 2 years later and think that that could have very well been the last Teco coal train that I'd ever see running, but at this point in time, it's looking like that could very well be the case. So albeit the various hangups that occurred along the way, I'll take this chase as it was, because once again, this could have very well have been the last train I'd ever see. And whether rail service returns to this facility in some shape or form or not, the Big Bend facility has undeniably changed forever. And we truly have documented history with at least some of the videos that we've shot here. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this old footage, because at least some of the things seen here are guaranteed to never be seen again. So from Big Bend, Florida, beneath the skyline forever altered, this is Kotabeaner, and I will see you next time, wherever that may be, on the Sunshine State Rails.